Hey everybody! Oh, come on. We know that normally we say, hey Pete. Let's try it one more time. Hey everybody!
Hey Pete!
Oh, that's much better. Today we're going to go over how to make a custom Matt Murdock Daredevil from the Netflix original series. And what I'm using here is, again, the Coulson Agent Coulson figure from the 3-pack from the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And what I have here is my Dremel. If you notice, I put on my goggles. Very important that you always put on your safety goggles when you're Dremeling. Even if it's something that's not particularly sharp, something that's just plastic, you'd be surprised how often that can get into your eyes. So absolutely one of the most important things to remember is your safety goggles. Here I have my Dremel Mini. And as I've said in my previous video, I like this one, because I can choose the speeds, and 2, because it's got a light. So I've got all kinds of light around me, and when you're working with something this small, it really does help to be able to see what you're doing. I have a magnifying glass that I purchased, which is great for getting in there, but you still need the light. So up in the top left corner, you can see I've got my reference photo right there on the tripod. And one of the things I've noticed when I'm dealing with this particular picture is it's been corrected. So the shadow that's coming off of his hair and the light that's on his face, those things wouldn't happen both together. So it makes it look like his forehead is much smaller than it actually is. And that posed a little bit of difficulty because I noticed with my finished product, which of course you'll see at the end, the hair looks very poofy and looks bigger than what it is. And if you do attempt to do this, I recommend that you pay close attention to that. So here what I'm doing is Agent Coulson, of course, one of the best suited figures that they've ever released. And they've used the body several times. They used it for the Mark Ruffalo Bruce Banner, and for the Chameleon that also had the other heads, the Hammerhead and J. Jonah Jameson. So the body is great. I was lucky enough to pick this one up on eBay, just the Agent Coulson, so I didn't have to pay for the whole pack. I've turned him into a Logan in the past as well. It's just a perfect body for the suit, and it really works well here. And what's nice is that the likeness of Coulson, although it's spot on, it's the shape of the head is close enough to the actor who plays Matt Murdock that you don't have to do a whole lot, but you still have to do some. So what I'm doing is the biggest difference that I've noticed is the nose. His nose, Agent Coulson's nose, and forgive me, I forget the actors' names, but the Agent Coulson's nose is a little bit sharper, a little bit more hooked than the one for Matt Murdock. So I'm sanding that down to try to get him to have a younger look and less immediately Agent Coulson. I'm also sanding down some of the wrinkles. They sculpted him with a little bit of a smirk, and even though Daredevil, you can see, has a smirk there, it's not the same. What I have in the green cup is just water and soap. After you sand down your figure, it's a good idea to wipe them down. Also, before you start doing any kind of painting, there's an oily residue that comes on most action figures that you want to make sure that you take off. Don't worry, the soap is not going to hurt it at all. You just want to make sure that you have a nice clean surface, because every little hint of residue and dust that you got from your sanding down is going to show up if you're not careful with the paint. What I'm doing now is I'm taking my handy dandy epoxy, and this is a 2-part compound that if you've watched my previous videos, you've seen that I like to use as my favorite sculpting medium. It's a 2-part air dry compound. Very important that you mix it extremely thoroughly. So what I'm doing here is just going through, making sure that you have 2 even pieces, one from each canister, roughly even. If you don't have even, it could seriously affect the dry time, or even mean that it doesn't dry completely ever. Also, kneading it properly, making sure that it is completely, what's the word? Completely blended together is also going to be important. So not a whole lot that I have to do here in terms of sculpting, but I am trying to challenge myself and get a little bit better with the hair. So that's the first thing that we're going to do is we're putting on the hair for Matt Murdock. And when you do put on hair, it's more important to get the shape right than it is to get the details. And if I had to do this over again, I noticed that he looks a little poofy. So when you're dealing with these kind of things, a little goes a long way. So pay very close attention to the details. If you're used to any kind of art, the negative space is super important. So make sure that you look at the background. Don't just look at his head, but look at the shape that his head makes in regards to the background. And that'll help you get a clearer feel. So that way it's not super bulky and draws attention to itself immediately. I'm pulling out of my little chest all of my favorite tools. I like the little metal dental looking tools. I feel like I can get a nice, precise feel with them. Whenever I try to use the plastic ones, they just catch. They're a little bit cheaper and not my favorites. So I don't use them a whole lot. The wooden ones are okay, but I think they work better in either clay or something less sticky. The metal doesn't tend to stick as much to the epoxy, and when you first start out, the epoxy is fairly sticky, so you have to be careful. What I'm doing now is I'm applying a solvent. It's the epoxy safety solvent. It feels kind of like soapy water, and what it does is it helps smooth it out so that you can get better detail without it looking as rough. It allows you to work with things without putting fingerprints on them and without having to just worry so much. It's just makes it easier. So here we're going to see me just going through a lot of painstaking detail work, and we're just trying to make sure that I get it right. So just pay attention to how much I go back and forth, and the whole point is to realize the time that it takes to do something. It is much more important to put in a little bit of extra time, especially in the beginning when you're not completely familiar with how to do it, than it is to just rush through it, which is always my problem. So while I'm doing that, I'll talk about the other figures that are on the desk. Most of them are custom figures. You can see just in the top middle, there's my Deadpool, which I made from a Captain America. I'm going to make another one of him, hopefully be a little bit cleaner, and I'll do another instructional video on that one. Just next to him is the Negasonic Teenage Warhead, and I made her from a... oh, what's the figure? The Nika Minoru, Marvel Legends. And then to the left, in the big yellow t-shirt, we can see Luke Cage. That was a Rock, the Rock from WWE, and just a simple repaint. I really didn't do a whole lot there. I felt like the figure looked close enough that I didn't have to do much. Although, if you are going to do it, it's not a very posable figure. It just has the T hips, so you can't get him into any kind of action poses, especially below the waist. And just below him, in closer to the foreground, we can see the Danny Rand Iron Fist, the Netflix version of him. That one took a little bit more work, and I did a lot more work, which you can see at the end of this video. I tried to tape it, but for whatever reason I realized I wasn't taping all the way when I was done, so sorry about that one. But that one, what I did was I took the white Iron Fist that I think came with the Dormammu Build-A-Figure. I popped off the head, and the head you might recognize as the first Star-Lord head that came out with the Groot Build-A-Figure series. And it's just placed on there right now. It'll pop right off if I'm not careful. And I painted him flesh tone. He's just wearing a jacket right now. Later I sculpted a jacket onto him, and I gave him a painted Iron Fist versus the clear one that they sell with it. And you can just see the hint of his dragon tattoo on his chest. So that one was fun. I'm not super pleased with it. I didn't really find the Iron Fist all that entertaining in Netflix, but I had to have him to round out my Daredevil, or excuse me, my Defenders collection. And surprisingly, they've only given us the Jessica Jones in the civilian state. Even the Luke Cage was an exclusive, and he's kind of hard to get his hands on. So yeah, I felt like I had to make my own. And you'll see that I've got several reference photos that I'm going through. If you are sculpting anything, it's important to make sure that you can get multiple angles so that you can see. The more visual references that you have, the cleaner your work is going to be. It's just so much easier when you can compare and see what it looks like in the different lighting and get more of a feel for what it actually feels like in reality. It's nice when you can also get pictures that are not photoshopped. By the way, if you're noticing that the camera's shaking a little bit, I've got my music playing in the background, and I had the bass jammed up pretty high, and this is what's causing it to shake that way. So apologies about that. Now you'll see that I'm sculpting glasses, and that was a pain. If I had to do that again, I don't think I would. I think I would have done it a completely different way. For those of you who are familiar with the figure, it comes with both the glasses figure and the one without the glasses. And you might say, well, why didn't you just use the one with the glasses? And I have that one. I'm going to show it here in just a second. But I wanted the challenge. I wanted to be able to see if I could sculpt the glasses without having that. They're also a different shape. The ones that came with the Agent Coulson figure have a flatter top, and these have more of an oval shape. So overall, I just didn't think that they would work all that well, and I think it would very clearly have been a painted Agent Coulson figure, and I was trying to avoid that. But if I had to do this again, no, I don't think it came out smoothly enough. And that might just be an error in my sculpting. But I think what I would try next time is cutting out little pieces of plastic and gluing them to his face, and then painting over that plastic. I think it would have taken me half the time and would have been probably even a better look. And then you would have had some of that, it would have been less bulky on his face. So I go back and forth here for a long time trying to get something smooth where I could have just done it in an easier fashion. Other thing that I might have been able to do that would have helped, epoxy is an air dry substance. So the longer you wait, the more it will dry, and you'll be able to smooth it out easily. So I think if I had just let it sit for a while, it might have been easier to put on without working on it. So there you see the Agent Coulson face, and you can see that the glasses are just a different shape. So I put that out there just for reference so you can see why I'm not using it. The other thing, I did not sculpt the frame of the glasses. I did not want them to be super bulky, and my sculpting skills are not fine and tuned enough yet where I can get the frames going over the ears and make it look so thin and not heavy. I wanted it to look light, so I just paint those on later, and I think it does a passable effect. It's not fantastic, but if you can sculpt that, hey, more power to you. That's gonna, anything you can do to make it more three-dimensional is great. You can fake a lot of things with painting that you don't necessarily need to do three-dimensionality, especially if you pay close attention to the shadows. But yeah, I decided to forego it this time. Yeah, so I'm just going back and forth here, and I'm using a little hooked, it looks like a dental tool, and what I'm using is more of the curve than the actual pinpoint in there. I think that gives me, without stabbing it, without poking little holes in it, that's what makes it look a little bit smoother. So I'm going along the edge, just trying to get that nice oval shape. Also, if you're ever sculpting or you're painting, one of the things that I learned is that people remember faces from the top down. So the more you can get the hair and eyes right, the more you're going to be able to convince people. So don't spend as much time on the chin and the lips. I mean, if you can do it, great, absolutely. The whole thing does make a difference, but that's how people are going to remember them. If you look at the reference photo closely, you can see that he's holding his billy club, or in this case, forgive me, I don't know the term for it, but his walking stick, and you can just see that in his left hand. So I feel like no Matt Murdock figure is going to be complete unless you have something that approximates that. So what I did was take a little piece of stiff wire. That way, when I sculpt over it, it will hold its structure. And again, I'm using the epoxy here, and the stiff wire just wasn't thick enough. And I also wanted to put the little hand wrist strap thing around there. So I decided that I was going to sculpt over this. And I didn't love it. I'll tell you before we even get to the end. I didn't think that it was particularly well done. And the final product does not have that little loop on there. That was something that I did away with. Not intentionally. So one, I made it a little bit too long. So this is one of those things where you should measure twice and cut once. In my case, I didn't even measure once. I just eyeballed it, and I made it what to us would be probably half an inch too long, but for him is close to about a foot too long, give or take. So yeah, it wasn't great, and it was a little too bulky at the top. So the reason why it doesn't have the loop anymore is I was sanding it down, something that you're not going to see on camera, and then the loop, which is made of hemp, got caught, and it completely frayed in my Dremel. So it was one of those accidents where it just caused me to cut the entire thing off. There was really no salvaging it. Of course, I could have put a different one, but this one I sculpted in there to make sure that it stays in there. And so yeah, it would have been nice to have that little loop, but one of the things I've always found with any kind of 6-inch scale is that soft goods don't really look all that great. So the loop would have been soft, and it never would have quite had the feel, the gravity. It wouldn't have laid right. Gravity doesn't kick in with something that small. It's too dainty to flop over. And a good example of that is if you look at the Iron Fist, the jacket, which, by the way, I took from the very old Gambit figure that came out. He had a cloth jacket. I forget which one. He was released both ways. He was released with a cloth one and then like a vinyl looking one to simulate the leather. So that was a trench coat that, since I had the duplicate, I cut off, and I had originally been using on my Cyclops for forever to give us that nice Jim Lee look with the jacket that he would toss off and the Children of the Atom game. So that's what he's wearing there. And you could see the collar's way too big. Even though it's made for a 6-inch figure, it doesn't fit right. The wrinkles aren't right. So I'm always very leery of using soft goods for action figures, because I just don't feel that in this scale they work out well. Once we start getting into slightly bigger scale, I think the 7-inch, maybe, the 12-inch for sure. But once you get into those kind of scales, it starts to look a little bit more real, and the folds tend to look more real, and it just lays better on the action figure. So whenever I have my choice, I'd rather have the hard clothing. So I like what they did with the Jessica Jones, who's now fallen over back there. I like the way her jacket is the soft plastic, or maybe it's rubber, I'm not even sure. Or if you think of the trench coat that they've used now several times over, the Spider-Man Noir figure that's just coming out, I think it's the same trench coat as the Nick Fury one, and I'm pretty sure they've used it a couple other times. I think Agent Zero had the same one, and it just works. You can sculpt the wrinkles better than you can get them in a soft goods and any kind of textiles. So we're going to see me going over and sculpting this thing for a while and just trying to smooth it out. And what I did at the end, I ended up cutting off almost the entire part of the handle portion, maybe about 2/3 of that, to get it to be about the right size. I also sanded it down because it was way too thick, and when you put it up against his hand, it looked bulky and it didn't have that same kind of feel as a blind man's cane that it should. So here's a really good example of me making a mistake. So I'm just showing you how I went through it, and I put all this work into it, and then at the end I just said, hey, you know what, I don't love this. And when you get that, if you ever are sculpting something or you're painting something, don't be afraid. It's okay if you say, you know what, I don't love the way this is going out. This is not working all that well. So nothing wrong with saying, whoops, made a mistake, I'm going to do it over, or I'm not going to use that thing. Don't get too attached to your work. That's something I've seen a lot in. And right now, so the reason I'm doing all of this is because we're gearing up for MegaCon, and I have been collecting for a long time, and I've been repainting figures here and there, and I thought it was kind of fun. But now I'm actually thinking about selling some of these things, and I realize that I have a lot of work cut out for me, and that I'm not nearly as good as I had originally imagined. I put it out there on Instagram. For those of you who are interested, I do toy photography all the time, and it's at Pete Menocal _ you can see how I use these action figures. So I put it out there with the Daredevil and the Negasonic and the Colossus, which you could just see his hand. And I said, what should I charge for these? And people were suggesting things like charging what I actually paid for them, which, you can either be insulted by that, or you can take it and say, wow, I've got my work cut out for me, and I need to go back to the drawing board and get better. And the only way that you're ever gonna get better is just by doing it and making these mistakes. So thank you for joining me on this journey, because a lot of this is just me trying to get better and trying to get to that level that I want to be. I see these people online, and I'm just in awe on how clean their sculpting is and how clean their painting is. And I've asked multiple people, how do you do it? And they give good tips. Like it's a really great community, and they're typically very happy to give back. We're a relatively small community, so nobody's ever really given me a hard time. But a lot of what it boils down to is just patience and practice. So that's what I recommend to everybody, to you. One, if you can help out, fantastic. Realize that you were probably at a place where you needed somebody's help too, and remember what it felt like when they did or did not give you that help. But be that kind of person. Be the kind of person that helps out and says, yeah, this is what I do, and this is what I like, and this is what I'm good at. Here we can see a mostly finished sculpted piece there before I started painting. So yeah, just make sure that you're going back and you're helping people as much as you can. So what I learned here was, with the painting, I was trying to mix my own skin tone, which is super hard to do. I have been a real painter, I guess, a painter of canvas with acrylic and oil for some time now. And my fiance, that's actually how we first met. Was we were talking about art, and I said, hey, what do you use? You use oils. I use acrylics. I'm always been afraid to use oils. And so I've been painting for a while now, and I can mix on the canvas well enough, but mixing it on an action figure on that kind of scale, there's really no margin for error. And you have to just get that skin tone spot on. And it's really hard to do. And a lot of times I've gone a tad too orange or a tad too pink, and even though I know in my head you mix orange and blue and you try to get it right, it's just not that easy. So what I found was the easiest cheat. If you go to testers, make sure you get acrylic. If you get enamel, it's going to take forever to dry, and it doesn't work very well with soft plastic, so you absolutely have to get acrylic. But you need just 3 basic colors, and then you can do skin tone great. They've got the skin tone, I think it's light, skin tone warm, which is that pink one just below my hand right now, and then the shadows, which is up above Agent Coulson's head. And you can't go wrong by just mixing those for Caucasian skin. If they sell something for African American, I haven't found it yet, so I'm still using some raw umber and burnt sienna for those kind of skin tones. But for the Caucasians, you mix those and you're going to get a really close approximation of skin tone. What's important is to layer, though. So I like to layer the warm and then put the light and then put a little bit of the warm over it. The light is way too light. It's gonna make your action figure look either dead or sick. So you can't use it by itself, and the warm is too pink. So it's gonna make them look like they either have a bad tan or they're radioactive. But going back and forth and mixing them, and then to be honest, I am mixing in a little bit of other colors. I've got, I think, a transparent raw umber that I like to mix in a little bit to give it some of that more shadowy tone. If you look at the reference photo, you'll see that he has bloody knuckles. I just fell in love with this photo when they were first advertising it. So I have done that too, and I'm just using a couple of different reds. Just play around with the red. Make sure when you're doing red, though, there's so many different shades of red that you can get. Don't get anything way too bright. Blood very rarely looks bright, and just like with everything else, you want to layer it. Most blood, especially if it's going to be on something that is had any time to dry, is going to start to darken. So it's good to put a darker layer. So I have a Van Dyke red that I'll use. That's kind of a brownish red. That'll work well. Sometimes you can use black, but black can be a little bit overpowering. So I'd suggest going to either the dark reds or the browns to do your base coat for the blood. And then you can put some of the highlights in there, some of the richer, just straight up bright red, like a cad red medium. And that's going to sell it a little bit more so that it doesn't just feel like you dipped their knuckles in paint. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking the shadow. This is the first time I'm ever using the shadow here. I just got that bottle about a week ago. And so I was pretty excited here. If you look at the reference photos, one of the things that is the key to Matt Murdock is that he looks like he doesn't take all that great care of himself. He's too busy out fighting crime to remember to shave in the morning. You know, every minute of sleep is important because he's up till probably 4 in the morning. So you got to get that shadow. Without that, it is not going to look like him, not the Netflix version anyway. So I'm using the shadow here. And one of the things I'm noticing is that it doesn't show up as much as I'm hoping for. So I was hoping that it would be a more noticeable effect. And it's okay, but it really is just for kind of filling in shadows. So it doesn't give you quite that stubble. And he's got that, gives me beard envy, how great his stubble is. Or I don't know if it's makeup or not, but it looks great, and this is just not cutting it. So in just a second, I'm going to start mixing this with a little bit of, just a tiny bit of black and a little bit of raw umber to give it a darker quality. It's starting to fill in a little bit. You can see it from this far away. And here I am trying to do a little bit more detail work. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is that when you are painting, you have to do very thin layers. It's better to do thin layers and then keep going over them. If you try to do it thicker, it's going to look gloopy or gloppy, and you're going to get these little pieces of residue, which might be okay if you're doing on cloth. But if you're doing skin, every hint of that shows up. And you'll see that, hey, there's Tiffany's wheel. Say hello. And there's my little dog Mushu in the back. So when you're doing that, thin it out, and you can thin it out with just a little bit of water, and that'll make it nice. But also, don't be afraid to sand it. You're going to need to sand it probably multiple times. So you sand it after you take away anything with your Dremel to make it nice and smooth. And then in between layers of painting, which I'm not showing on film, but I did go back and touch up several times with the sandpaper. So just what I recommend too is your eye, you kind of get numb to it when you're working on it. When you're working on it so close, you tend to focus on the details, and you miss the big picture. So it wasn't until I went back and I took a picture that I was going to post on Instagram that I noticed how rough it looked. And I said, whoa, wow, that did not photograph well at all. And then I went back and I touched it up. So I highly recommend that you take a lot of pictures along the way. If you are going to be putting it on Instagram or making any kind of videos or doing anything, people love to see the in-between shots. It also helps you see where you've come. Sometimes you'll feel like you've worked all day on something and you barely made any progress. So taking those pictures absolutely helps. And then be honest with yourself. Say, does this look good? Is this something that I'm satisfied with? And a lot of times you're going to find the answer is no. So don't be afraid to go back and rework it. This figure took me about 2.5 hours before I thought I was done. And then I went and took some pictures with it, and I was like, that's not good enough. That's exactly why people were telling me that I needed to charge cost versus making any kind of profit off of this. So I went back and put in probably another hour, maybe 2 hours, not sure, on just trying to smooth it out. What I'm doing here is I'm adding a collar. So even though the figure comes in a suit and he's got a shirt and a collar, it's a very smooth collar. It's the way you would expect a shield agent to look, just perfectly ironed and pressed. And the whole point of Daredevil is that he's not that way. So I wanted to add a rumpled collar. And what I found is it's a lot easier if you smooth the piece of, whether it's clay or epoxy or whatever you happen to be working with, if you smooth it out first rather than just kind of put a lump on there and try to smooth it out after. So if you can smooth it out as much as you possibly can and then put it on, you're going to find that it's easier to approximate cloth. So you see how flattened, like how much I've flattened it. And I'm working on something so small, so I just kind of flattened it with my fingertips, but rather than put a round lump on there. I didn't spend a lot of time on the collar. If I were going to go back and do it, one of the things I would have done is taken off the jacket. The jacket is removable on this figure. All you have to do is position the arms both straight backwards and work it over the shoulder. Once you get over one shoulder, you're home free. The other one will come right off. So I would have tried to instead of trying to do it around the jacket like I'm doing here, I would have taken my time to sculpt it a little bit cleaner. I am just so impatient with my work. Once it starts to look a little bit like what I want it to look like, I say, oh, I want to paint it and I want to get it done and I want to see the finished product. So again, don't be like me. Take your time. It's worth it. I really wish now that I had taken off his jacket. It just would have made it so much cleaner. I'm already noticing that the figure is not as as smooth as I would have liked. And if I would have done anything differently, it would have been just taking the time in little areas and not rushing to the next step, letting it dry, letting it have its time. So here I'm going through and just blocking out the gray on the suit. The gray in the reference photo is a very dark, almost charcoal gray, and I don't want to do that. But the thing is that I know that photo is color corrected. So other reference photos that I have where he's in the daylight, this gray is a lot closer to it. So I'm just blocking out the color. I'm using the same gray that I've used in other videos. It's a neutral gray value 5 acrylic. And it works well enough, although I think if I were to do it again, I would probably mix it with with either get a darker gray or mix it with a little bit of black just so it's a little bit darker. And in the video, although this is one of the things I went back and corrected. If you look at the legs, you can tell that I just kind of dry brushed the legs, and that was partly because I wanted the darker color. So I wanted some of the black from the original photo to show through, but it ends up looking unfinished rather than looking like it was intentionally that color. Just looks like I was impatient with my painting, which is absolutely what I was. As you're going along too, one of the things that is just off camera is I have a cleaner for my brushes. Acrylic paint dries super quick. Literally within minutes, it will dry to the point where it's tacky, and then within a half an hour, it's completely dry. There's nothing that you can do. Well, I mean, there are things that you can do, but it's dry. So I'm constantly cleaning my brushes in between, especially if I'm going to change any kind of color, but I want to make sure that it doesn't have a chance to dry. I've ruined so many brushes in the past because I'll just leave them in the water, or I'll wait until they're too far gone, and then the bristles get all bent out of shape. And even though there are cleaners that you can do and there are brush restorers, it's never quite the same. And particularly when you're working with this small a scale, you want to make sure that you're taking care of your brushes and not having bristles out of the order. If you're trying to paint details on a face, every little hint will absolutely show up of your bristles being out of whack. You can see here that I'm going back over with a slightly darker gray. I've mixed the gray with a little bit of black to make sure that it looks closer to the reference material. And it's interesting that they have him in gray. And I think that the producers, the writers of the show, did that on purpose. I think he's blind, obviously, so they just go with a neutral color, but his morality is somewhat gray, right? So he'll beat the living bejesus out of somebody. He has no problem with that. Obviously, he's not a murderer. That's his whole thing. He draws the line. But he takes things into his own hands, and he has somewhat of a gray outlook on life. It's less black and white. So I think that's reflected in the suit. Of course, it could just be that, hey, we just picked gray and I'm reading too much into it, which wouldn't be the first time. But it shows up nicely in the photographs. I'm kind of glad that it's gray and not a black, because with the blacker photographs, particularly since this is a character that you see at night all the time, the black tends to just blend into the background, and it makes the photographs harder to light properly. If you are lighting a character that is all in black and you're shooting him in the nighttime, it's going to be hard. You're going to have a real hard time picking up the outline of the character without it looking like it's too bright. So it being this grayer color works very nicely. So when you are photographing the action figures, little tips that I can give you here is your lighting is very, very, very important. What I have, I'm not sure the wattage of it, but it's the lights that they have the cover on it. If you have direct light on your action figure, they're going to end up looking more plastic than they need to. I mean, we're already dealing with plastic, but any kind of direct light is going to make it shiny and glossy. And it takes you out of the moment. It makes you just realize that you're looking at a toy. So try to get indirect light as best you can. Indirect sunlight is probably the best. There's no mimic for that if you want to really be able to see the detail of the photo. But having multiple sources of light and indirect light at that is probably one of the best things you can do. Now what I'm doing is I'm painting on the actual glasses, which really is going to complete the look of the action figure or come close to completing it. And I started with just using some acrylic gloss that I let dry on there. And then I'm putting in a layer of black, and I'm going to go back over with red and black and a couple of layers of each. And I wanted to get that very glossy, make it look like glass kind of feel. Again, if I had to do it over again, I would have just used a little cutout piece of plastic, but I'm trying to get a little bit better with the sculpting skills. And as I'm painting the glasses and I'm positioning him around, you can see how rough the painting looks on the suit. Here what I do is I have always keep like a paper towel or a rag next to you. Acrylic, one of the nice things is it's water soluble. So that means before, or it's not water soluble, it's a water base. So before it dries, just a little bit of water will make it come right off if you get to it quickly. If you wait, it's water won't do anything. It'll actually become waterproof. But if you have a damp cloth handy, or you have a cloth that you can dampen, you can get off mistakes pretty quickly if you get to them quickly. This is again the gloss that I'm putting on, so there's probably about 3 or 4 layers of gloss on there. And I'm doing that for 2 reasons. One, the glossy effect, but also to fill in, because I didn't make it as smooth as I would have liked. So this helps fill in some of the gaps. While I'm letting that dry, I'm painting his walking cane. And I was lucky enough, when I searched for Daredevil, I didn't find a lot of pictures of him as Matt Murdock. But lo and behold, when you search for Matt Murdock, you find more of those. So I got lucky, and before I declared it done, I found a picture of what his cane looked like, which was good because I didn't realize that there was red at the end of it. So by doing that, it made it look that much more real. And the red is nice when it photographs because it is that Daredevil color. So it's just a little hint of who you're looking at when he's in this form. If you haven't seen the Netflix, the only thing that really have to clue you in is that he's got the red glasses. Other than that, he's just a guy in a suit. So anything that tells you that otherwise, I'm all for it. You can see in the background my I Love Boston coffee cup. Probably went through about 12 cups of coffee while I'm drinking this because I am absolutely addicted. But if you got to be addicted to something, action figures and coffee are probably the easiest ones. And although my wallet might disagree with me when it comes to the action figures. As I'm going through, and I've mentioned this before, the whole point of this is watching me make mistakes and hopefully watching me learn from my mistakes. So I'm going to learn on my own, but of course I would love it if anybody who actually knows what they're doing or knows what I'm doing wrong wants to comment on this. Have at it. Short of calling me just a complete loser and trolling me, any kind of helpful advice that you can give, and any tips or steps that you see that I'm skipping, please let me know in the comments. Also, if you want to see that me tackle a certain project, I'm looking to get better. So feel free to let me know what you think and what I need to do or where I need to go. That would be great. As I'm doing this, one of the things I realized that I really would love to do, but I'm just not a good enough sculptor yet, is I want a Vincent D'Onofrio king pen. I think that would be awesome. So getting that would be just make my day. So if anyone knows how I can pull that one off, that would be great. I did see, if I wanted to make the Michael Clark Duncan one, I thought the Ving Rhames Pulp Fiction figure wouldn't have been a bad base figure to start with. That has definitely the right body shape for it, and might not be too bad. So here we see the mostly completed. Of course, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fix it up a little bit, but I'm fairly happy with the way it looks. I think that it passes the squint test, and we can see back to back him and Daredevil. And I want to include some action shots so you actually see what it looks like. And behind it, you have the dioramas that Tiffany makes, and this is my absolute favorite with the back alley. So here we have Matt Murdock doing things that he shouldn't be doing in broad daylight. He's climbing the fire escape, doing a handstand out there, going up the fire escape, and then finally on the rooftop. And thought it might be nice to see a before and after. So here's the Agent Coulson next to the Matt Murdock. This is with all the touch-ups that I did, including the bloody knuckles and everything. And here we have the Defenders. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you had as much fun watching this as I did making it. Please click the subscribe and of course leave any comments that you have. And always remember, respect your shelf.